Hello, everybody. This is Dave Wallace coming to you from my backyard here in Wahiawa, Hawaii. And aloha. Okay. I'd like to wish all of you fathers out there a happy Father's Day, being Father's Day today. Okay. And thank you for joining me in this week's episode. In honor of our dads, I'd like to spend time today to reminisce about my dad and share with you some of my experiences and memories with him. My dad is William Kaleimomi Oholehua Wallace Jr., and he was born on the island of Maui. And as a very young boy, he and his parents and other family members from Maui moved to the island of Molokai to be settlers on the Holehua homesteads. These are the Hawaiian homesteads located in central Molokai in the plateau between the two mountains, Pu'ukamako and Mauna Loa on the west. So there's a kind of like a plateau area, okay? And so it was very challenging for the families to make a living there because of several ancient things that I had shared with you, mainly the Imukalua Ua, which is the rain heiau that was created to kill the rain gods. Okay, so for longest time, this area was a desert, and this is what Hawaiians were given. They were given the challenge to make a living on this land. Okay, Holehua, and my grandparents accepted the challenge. Okay, so that's them. Okay, and so my dad grew up in a home that was a mixture of Hawaiian practices and beliefs, as well as a strong Christian background. There were Mormons, and my grandparents were very devout Mormons. At the same time, they were born in a time period when some of the practices of ancient Hawaiians were taught to them, and they were familiar with them. Okay, so those are the conditions that my dad um, were raised under. And it's really interesting talking to my dad because he was fluent in the language. He understood the language really well. He understood the customs, but he never passed it on to us directly. More kind of like on a side because my mom was very different. She was very devout Mormon, and her family background proved that her parents were pioneers, part of pioneer families who had left Polynesia and gone to Utah as a test of their faith, the Mormon faith. So a lot of conflicting beliefs there. Okay, so let's focus on my dad. My dad was a very talented man. Um, he was a truck driver by training. In fact, before he became a firefighter, he was driving trucks for the pineapple plantations on Molokai. And even after becoming a fireman, during his part time hours, he would work driving trucks. He also drove school buses and he also planted um, the pineapple seeds. Okay, that was really hard work, back-breaking work, bending over all day planting. Okay, so my dad was a really hard worker. One of my earliest memories I have with my dad is I must have been probably about 6 months old, and I was moving around. I was walking already, and I was walking or crawling around. And one day I remember I was outside in our garden in our first homestead, and our garden was kind of like on a slant. Our whole 40 acres was on a slant, so our garden was built right next to our home on on a steep slant. And so I was playing in a garden while my dad was creating a bed for fresh vegetables. And he was digging, 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 and I was scooping up dirt and playing. And something started to catch my attention. I heard noises that I couldn't explain. It sounded unusual. And I started looking up, and above us were trees, and these were false koa trees. They look like koa. Their leaves are shaped like koa, long and skinny, and they even put out the yellow flowers that look like koa, but they're not koa trees. Okay, the barks are very different, and so a lot of homesteaders were using these trees as windbreaks for their home, and these trees surrounded our bracketed actually our garden, and that's where we were. Anyway, I heard this strange noise going on, and I couldn't understand what it was. So I stood up and I looked up, and I saw something kind of like a bowl in the tree above me, and a tree limb. And the tree limb was a little bit too tall, and I couldn't reach it. And I was curious about it, and I kept looking up and pointing, and I looking at my dad. And finally, when I caught my dad's attention, and when he saw me, I pointed up, and my dad came over and he picked me up, and he lifted me up from the ground, and he reached up and grabbed this branch that had this brown thing on there. And when he lowered it, I could see inside, and it was a bird's nest. And inside this bird nest were four little chicks, little little balls of fur, really puffy, and it looked like they were a new hatchling because their eyes were shut. But as soon as the branch was lowered and they could sense our presence, the chicks all opened their mouth and started cheeping again, chirping again, chirping again, chirping again, and it looked like they were hungry. So my dad took the time to show me this, and this is the first memory I have of him. And he said I must have been about 6 to 7 months old, and I could remember that. And that's something that's embedded in my mind forever. Now, my dad was a very interesting person because if you showed curiosity or you wanted to know something about anything, he would help you and try and accommodate you and give you a lot of room. I remember wanting to build different things on a farm, but I wanted to do it, and my dad would try and come by and help me, and I get really angry. I said, "Let me alone, let me do it," and my dad kind of like back off and said, "Okay, son, go for it." And if my cages came out crooked or offline, hey, that's my problem. But at least I did it myself, and that's the kind of kid I was. And my dad eventually knew the type of person I was, so he gave me a lot of room, and he didn't force his ideas on me, and he just allowed me to carry out my ideas. And if it worked, hey, good. He praised me. If it didn't work, he says, "Hey, son, like, that's okay. At least you tried." So there's a lot of encouragement, that type of encouragement that came from my dad. Okay, so that was the first memory I have here. The second memory I have that's attached to my dad is something that frightened me and affected my life forever. And from this incident, I gained a great fear of heights. And to explain this, on the north shore of Molokai is a series of cliffs. In fact, some of the tallest cliffs in the Pacific is on Molokai North Shore. And all along that cliffs, at the base of it, is Molokai Gold. Molokai Gold is Opihi, yeah, not Pakalolo. Anyway, so Opihi, choke Opihi over there, okay, because it's very difficult to access. And there are several places that people who live in a community um, developed trails over the years. There's this one trail leading to Opihi ground we call Cable. Why cable? Because there's a cable over there that you got to hold on to go down the cliff. Okay, so it's very dangerous. And some of these trails are goat trails. You gotta go follow until you reach to the base. So a lot of people use these trails and ways to get down the cliffs. And unfortunately, occasionally, some of them misstep and fall, and they either hurt themselves or get killed. And one day we were home, and my dad was not working, and he was babysitting all of us. And so we were home, and my dad received a call from the fire department that there was an accident. An OP picker on a North Shore of Molokai had slipped and fallen and died. So it was a recovery. It's not a rescue, but it was a recovery operation. So the firemen that were on duty were up there. There was enough, but since they called my dad was ni ele. He loaded us up onto the car, and we headed up to the back of the cliff. And by the time we got there, there were a lot of people standing at the edge of the cliff, looking over the cliff at people working down. And you could see these little people. They look like ants moving down at the base of the cliff, moving around. And you know there were people because they were dressed in different color coats. Anyway, they were recovering this body of this man who had fallen. And to assist in the recovery of this body, a military helicopter was brought in. And so this helicopter flew over us from the airport and went down, and it was hovering. We saw it hovering just above the body, and then pretty soon the helicopter lifted up. And all this time, my dad is holding me in his arms, and he's staring over the cliff, and I'm looking down, and I'm holding, like, clinging to my dad, hands turning white, and I was like, "Dad, you're too close." And my dad kind of like laughed, and he's oblivious to my fears. And so the helicopter flies up, and as it flies over us, directly over us. And I feel this kind of like wet things hitting us. And then I started looking at myself, and these wet things were blood. They were red, okay, and it had an unusual smell. And I'm looking at this, and a lot of people were getting splashed with this blood. And I remember that too. And from that point on, I became so afraid of heights. My knees get wobbly if I'm standing too high on a balcony at a hotel. I don't like looking over. Okay, so it still affects me to a degree today. Okay, if I prepare myself and psych myself out mentally, I can handle it. But if it appears all of a sudden where I step out and not prepared, my knees get really wobbly, and I need to go sit down. So, thank you, Dad. Okay. Um, Now there's other things that I remember as a boy doing with my dad, and a lot of these things have to do with going to the beach. And the first thing is my dad was a net fisherman. He always had a throw net with him. Okay, and he spent a lot of times on his spare time fixing or repairing his throw net, making sure it's balanced and the lead's not bust up. And just the way he used to throw, he used to wreck his net and need a lot of repair. So he spent a lot of time repairing his net. Anyway, so my dad, uh, on certain times of the year, especially when the moy was running and it was season and it was legal to catch them, Actually, during that time, there wasn't that much regulations, but he tried to follow, tradition about letting the spawning moy alone. Okay, he didn't like catching moy that was spawning or had eggs inside. So, certain times of the year, especially in June or during the summer, and when the tide was low, that's when he'd take us out and we'd go fishing for moy. And his code word to let us know that it was time to go fish was, "Hey boys, holo holo, let's go holo holo." So as soon as you hear the word holo holo, it's time to put on your shorts and your light shirt because we're going to get wet. So we accompany my dad down to Momomi. We park the car and we start walking to his moy grounds. And as we're walking on the shore and looking at the different moy holes, we can see the moy inside the hole and closest to the shore. And he'd stop and gather up his net and sneak up on the school of moy and one throw. A lot of times, one throw that's enough. His net would be filled with enough fish for us and the family members. So he gather up the net, gather up the fish, and he put the fish in a bag. And me and my brother served as bag boy. We're the one that carrying the fish in a bag home, and my dad is walking. So we did we did that quite often, and even times when it wasn't um, time for moy, the we'd go down to Momoi to go fish for other fish that may be running, like um, not yeah, Enenui. Enenui would be another fish that he liked to catch. Sometimes once in a while he'd throw on manini. Okay, so these are the types of fishes that we enjoyed eating. Okay, and so we were bag boys. The final memory of my dad that I'm going to be sharing with you is, uh, my as I got older, closer to my teens, and before I left Molokai, I was probably in the seventh, eighth grade. I started accompanying my dad to his Opihi grounds, and during this time, we had relatives living on Oahu that would call my dad and ask if they could get some OP for parties here on Oahu. So my dad would say, "Okay, we go pick OP for you folks." So my dad and his good friend Sonny English would agree on a time, and he'd ask me if I'd like to come with him, and I said, "Sure, let's go." And so we again drive down to Momomi and we start heading west across the dunes. And we walk to this place called Bullhead Hill or Ballheaded Hill. And it's a dome, it's a sand dome, okay, right above the cliff. And once you reach the sand dome, there's a trail that takes you down the cliff to my dad's OPE ground. And a lot of people that were friends with my dad knew about this place. And it was a nice, safe place, and there's a lot of good OPE there. So the walk would take about an hour or so. So crossing sand, and we start in the early afternoon, and by the time we reach Ballhead Hill, the sun is beginning to set. And by the time we reach the base, the sun just uh, lowering down the horizon and it's getting dark. Then we have time enough to light a fire and take out our evening meal and enjoy dinner under the stars. We'd sleep there overnight and wait until the morning. And just before the sun gets up, we get up and we start picking OP. And we pick OP probably for about an hour or so. And after that time, by that time, our bags would be filled with more than what we need, and we have the option of either sitting there and shelling the OP, and if you're really quick, you could do that. Or if you're too tired, you can pack it out and shell and all. So a lot of times we carry our OP out of that area, shell and all. And so it was hard work and took a lot of time. And but the gift from the ocean, this beautiful OP was there. And the beautiful thing about picking OP in a place like that is that you can cherry pick, the size that you want. And there's an ideal size of OP. You don't want them bigger than a silver dollar. You don't want the OP looking more like an abalone, because by then you got this huge foot and it's pretty tough. Those monster size OP we leave alone because we know they're makua or parents, and they create the next generation of OP. You leave the big ones alone. Next time you come, you're still gonna get plenty OP. Okay, so you take the smaller ones and leave the big ones alone, and you leave the keiki alone so that they can grow up. And I get sick sometimes when I look at OP that people are serving at luau's, or you find them in a store and they're smaller. They're smaller than a dime. That's uh, that's child abuse. Okay, that's child abuse right there. So uh, these are some things that I learned from my dad. Respect the aina. If you're gonna be using this place, if you're gonna be picking OP, make sure you leave enough for other people, because we all live in an island. And if you take everything, there's not enough for your neighbors, there's not enough for the next time, okay, that you need. But if you malama and you take care and be observant and let the parents multiply, go get plenty. Okay, so these are uh, some ideals that he taught me. Yeah, just take what you need and leave the rest alone. Okay, so anyway, these are important memories I had of my dad. My dad was very supportive of me in sports. My dad and my mom came and watched me play basketball. That's the only sport I played on Molokai. But they were very supporting and loving parents, and anything we needed, they tried their best to give it to us or make it possible to happen. So I love you, Dad, and I wish all of you folks out there pleasant memories of your dad, and be sure that the memories you're creating with your own children are memorable ones too. Okay? So this is Dave Wallace saying mahalo for watching, and catch you folks next time. Aloha.